homes concentration. And couldn't wait to get out of Rochester by the time I graduated. So I went to Boston and Philadelphia, and about 2005 I moved back to the area. And I jumped right into real estate because my mom had been a realtor when I was growing up, so I kind of had that in my blood. And I think like most of you that are starting companies, you kind of, your startup generally starts by finding a problem that you need to solve. And so for me, it was, I was out trying to act as a realtor in the marketplace, and you'd kind of being asked to find a home for sale. And I'd search a multiple listing system. I'd find 6,000 homes for sale in the Rochester area. Now, if you came to me and asked me to find an apartment for you, that same multiple listing system that realtors use has about 50 or 60 listings in it in our area, and there's about 6,000 to 8,000 units available. So it just seemed kind of odd to me that at the time it was the year 2006. So, there wasn't anywhere I could find those units. So as it turns out, Craigslist was kind of that place. So that kind of got me down the path of hey, I need to create something to solve this. And started to look at hiring developers just to build a website, and then realized it was more of a technology company. And that brought Daniel into the fold, and we kind of very early on kind of came up with the solutions to, how could we solve this together as opposed to just creating one off. So we formed New Digs. The DBA goes all the way back to 2006, and then we launched our first public beta website in May 2010. So. In those 4 years, we kind of, learned a lot of the hard, expensive lessons that you learn when you're trying to start something on your own. And really, this community incubator concept and project is kind of just, I guess, kind of almost in response to kind of the experiences we've had trying to start up a company here. So, we started New Digs. We were just trying to create a map-based environment where you could easily search apartments. We needed to compete with Craigslist to make it, free to list so we could get everyone to the table. So, we come up with an easily searchable prototype. We spent 3 years actually at RIT's business incubator they have just off campus on John Street called Venture Creations. And so they kind of helped us evolve the business model, and while we were there, we came up with a new iteration for look and feel. This year we actually find out in March what happens, but we're a Best for Web finalist from Rochester Business Journal for this year at New Digs. So, the evolution that took place in the incubator definitely was pretty valuable to us. And while we were in there, there's a lot of companies that are under the umbrella of the incubator. There's a few more that aren't on the slide. But the nice thing about these incubators is it gives you a chance to kind of rub elbows with the people, and you've got support on site and things like that. And as we went through Venture Creations, it was any university incubator has a bit different model than maybe a traditional West Coast kind of venture capital incubator, where traditionally it's a couple of investors getting together, putting a pile of money down, trying to pick the best, most successful prospects, really supporting them and pushing them out the door for an exit. University models are a bit more kind of, they're not as aggressive on the growth side. They don't have the resources necessarily to bring as much support to bear. So as we were going through the Venture Creations incubator, we kind of took a note of what worked and what didn't work, and kind of kept a checklist of wish list items, so that when we kind of got out into the broader startup environment, we kind of had an idea of what we felt was missing. But there's been a lot of stuff since we went into RIT back in 2006. Things like Start Fast Venture Accelerator have come out. That's a project that Nasser Ali is kind of spearheading out of the Syracuse area. And if you haven't had a chance to go over to Syracuse and check out the Tech Garden Center over there they have, it's a really awesome incubator. I've gotten a chance to go out there a couple of times just to kind of get a feel for how they're doing things. And it's amazing. Syracuse is about half the size of Rochester, but their startup scene is really making some waves. And this is one of the most recent ones. They've got mentors like Brad Feld and some other nationally recognized folks kind of behind this. So upstate more and more. And you see it in the paper with it being more livable and a good place to buy property. But I personally really believe that there's kind of this groundswell of activity there, especially as folks like Kodak keep shedding really talented people back into the workforce. They're kind of letting go of their inner sanctum now, I think, at this point. So there's all these talented people kind of reigning out of the Kodak Tower, and we've got an opportunity to kind of really support this community. And kind of, I think there's an inflection point coming. Another thing before I showed you kind of the scope of what's happening in Rochester, Startup Weekend Rochester is coming up. Again, another new kind of event for the Rochester area. This is more of kind of a weekend-long boot camp. There's like, I think, usually $99 or $50 for students, something like that.
Yeah, students $50, and then some of the universities are going to subsidize that cost. So I think the cheapest you can get it is $25.
Yeah. Yeah. So somewhere between $25 and $100 depending on who you're if you got the right student badging and whatnot. But basically, it's a weekend-long, intensive kind of workshop where you come in and everyone starts with ideas. They form teams there, come up with products. And, it's a great event. So they've got Maggie Brooks as one of the keynote speakers, just kind of solidified for that. And then David Koretz, he's been involved with RIT's Venture Creations Incubator historically. But just this week, I heard the news that as one of our Rochester kind of native startup guys, he just sold Beaconos for $80 million this week. So had a pretty successful exit. So there is a track record of people starting software companies in academia for 8 to 9 figures, which is nice to see. So David will probably give us a little insight on that. But if you guys are interested in just flexing your startup muscles, it's probably very nice. But just kind of borrowing the page from you on my startups website, Julian started trying to put together a web presence that just kind of maps out, all the groups like this that are getting together. I've been in the startup scene in Rochester for like 5 years now, and it seems like every month I hear about a new group. I wasn't familiar with Titanium. I've heard of App Rochester, which is a bunch of mobile app developers in Rochester getting together, but I hadn't heard of Titanium. So there's always the fact that you're missing something. No one ever has the whole picture on the startups in Rochester. And I think to some extent that's what Julian was doing here, is just trying to create a visualization of here all the different things happening. And so it gets us off to a good start. And it kind of, it shows that we've got that critical mass in town here. So the folks like HTR, they've got the Linux iTech incubator down in Henrietta. And it's a great facility, but most of the people that are going to have the idea to start a business aren't going to come out in like a biopharma research space or something a little higher tech that they're interested in. So one of the things that we kind of noticed and kind of came up with was of these incubators in town end up turning down hundreds of people a year each week. So where do those folks go right now? They end up in these kind of, I guess I call them support groups. For folks that want to start businesses, the Rochester support group. And so we just kind of realized really you need to kind of get people just rubbing elbows and give them a common area to kind of come together and connect in. And so that started this process back I'd say about probably 6 or 8 months ago, where we really got serious about, hey, we're going to do this. And Rochester, the state of New York, had that regional economic development contest, competing for the funds. And that kind of got me putting pen to paper on the incubator. I'm like, hey, maybe I can compete for some money, get the money to start this thing. And, it was probably a naive expectation, a couple million from the state to just start something. Sure enough, the usual entities kind of got appropriated monies. And there actually is a plan that's funded, earmarked anyway, under that fund for Rochester. That's going to be a regional accelerator of some kind. High Tech Rochester, I think, is kind of spearheading that. And I think there's $4 million the state will offer when they come up with 10, something like that. So, there are things kind of already heading in this general direction, but one of the things I think we've got an opportunity to do is just put the rubber to the road a lot sooner. If we wait for the state to build something, find $10 million, we might all be long out of the startup game before that actually turns up. So we're trying to find, at the very least, what's the stopgap between here and some glorious, giant funded facility, or possibly can we build a stopgap and grow it into a really nice, standalone facility of its own. So we were talking to the executive director of City Brockport's Metro Center. This building is actually just next to the river. So here's the river, here's the Hyatt Tower here, the Pink Hotel, the Radisson, and this is City Brockport's Metro campus. And it was built by George Eastman in 1919. It's a beautiful facility. They spent a few $1 million renovating all that into really nice common area space, computer labs, classrooms, that kind of thing. And at the river level, kind of on the back of it facing the river, they've got vacancy there. And so at least at this stage, we're chatting about the possibility of, if we started a community incubator and put it in that smaller footprint downstairs where we're going to have maybe common area and some desk space. Could we leverage all the computer labs? Could I have a class of landlords come in and learn how to use UDIGs and not have the incubator try to provide a classroom full of 30 computers? And so far the talks are going pretty well. So I think we might have like some space we can leverage and kind of get a toehold somewhere. So that's kind of that first baby step. And then, kind of just trying to get ready and preparing for future stuff. We've been kind of just looking around, if we are going to do this, this thing needs to have more than like a 2 or 3 year plan. What's the 5 or 10 year plan? So, presuming we started here, and this isn't by any means set in stone, to start a community incubator in a location like that, right across the street is this building called the Edwards Building. This white stone front kind of building here. And that's entirely vacant. It's owned by the county. It's like 180,000 square feet. And there's another 280,000 square foot building attached to it that faces Main Street. It's also vacant. So we went in there and kind of poked around and just trying to start laying the relationship anyway. But this is in the first floor of that Edwards building, looking out to St. Paul Street. I think kind of the longer term vision for a community space like this would be the first floor would be that kind of open, mixed kind of common area, because really it's about rubbing shoulders. At RIT's incubator, we had a great space, a great facility, but everyone so distinctly had their own nice finished cubbies that, when we left, we didn't probably know maybe a fifth of the people that were there. It just really seemed to be, even though we were all on one rooftop, it didn't seem to be close enough. So, maybe putting like a Boulder Coffee and Rock Brewing kind of a setup on the first floor here and make it more of a public space, and then have incubation suites and flower stuff upstairs if possible. On the 4th floor of that building, or 3rd floor, they've got a whole dining facility. This used to be Xerox. On the 3rd floor, they've got 4th floor. They've got a whole data center still sitting there. Cooling systems are still in place.
Huge.
And the next building over, the gateway building on Main Street. This whole atrium is just sitting there vacant. There's like this awesome space. It's been sitting there for like a decade and a half. This is all behind boarded up doors and things on Main Street. So, as you look to the right, every floor has a glass wall of conference rooms looking down into this atrium. It's crazy it's still sitting there, but the county's just been, looking for a tenant. Actually, this building was slated for demolition as part of Renaissance Square. So to give you a sense of where the footprint is and all that. So this was it'd be garbage, but I figure we can probably fill it with a couple thousand employees, if a couple hundred small businesses want to live there. So that's kind of, so basically the whole crux of where this community incubator movement is right now is that we've got a relationship set up with Tony Mancuso, who's out in Batavia, and in the process of my writing the business plan for this incubator, I come to find out the first business incubator in the United States was actually started in Batavia, New York, by the Mancuso family in the early 60s. So Western New York is actually home to the nation's first incubator. So Tony Mancuso and a group of us have kind of come together. We're trying to see if we can kind of put this somehow under one umbrella, because if Rochester starts, the 684th incubator in the United States, no one really care. But we're all about branding this region as a startup hub and creative core and that kind of stuff. And so, maybe if we can spin the story that this is the first incubator in the U.S. kind of reinventing itself in this economy, positioned it differently, I think that really, we can get the Wall Street Journal for that. And Rochester hasn't had much of a problem getting the Post Journal for shining. So, I just want to see us kind of ride this inflection for the area. So, at this point, I didn't go through with actually asking the state to give us a couple $1 million because I saw there was kind of universities and state entities already kind of fighting for those monies. So my theory was, well, if we can actually start this like an incubator starts, something more organic, just kind of ground up, and just get the kind of organization, people behind it, and then we can show, the Coughlin Foundation or the county or whomever that, hey, look, we got a kind of waiting line of 100, 200, 300 small business folks who would like to, be involved in this in some capacity. So that got me to talking with Taryn about to do that. The kind of the easiest way to do that, if you want to get even just a small space to kind of call ours as a community incubator, you're going to have to spend at least $5,000 or $10,000 a month and that'll get you about 5 or 10,000 square feet. So there's going to have to be some overhead. So how do you get that first? How do you open the doors that first month? So the strategy basically is, I had said to Taryn, hey, I've created this social network for my neighborhood, just using a name network that's pretty easy. They've got now a paid wing network that you can just charge monthly subscriptions for. In terms of handling membership, and let's call it supporting membership, if it were like XXI or something like that, right? Would entrepreneurs be interested in paying $30-40 a month or something of that nature to be a supporting member of this community incubator? And then that obviously has certain kind of assets that come with that. Access to maybe a secured social network for the community that, maybe folks like myself, we might have felt that we paid a fortune for, our documents for getting funding together. We might be able to create, put that up as a template for other folks to use and say, great. So pretty quickly, I think the value is there. There's a lot of education stuff that I've talked to different service providers and professionals, CPAs, branding specialists, developers that would like to go and maybe give a class on how to, create a simple WordPress site for yourself and just get going. It's all about just taking the next step. And all those courses could be included as part of that supporting membership. So right now we're just at that point where we're filing all the paperwork, we're getting the 501c3s in place. Kind of those things are in motion, but now kind of coming, I guess, to the tech community here and just seeing, where do you guys maybe think we should go on the tech end of this? Taryn had suggested that, I guess, we were working on, we were working on a project that was kind of similar to this. So I didn't want to reinvent the wheel, and I figured in kind of a more community startup venue, it might make sense to just kind of kick this out there and see what you guys are working on. And also, at this stage, I'm really kind of curious just to hear feedback and what you guys feel is necessary in a community incubator, and what you're doing to like run a model like this that evolves from you. So, I guess I'll kick it over to you guys at this stage. So, I'm just kind of curious to hear, how with the social network that you're working on, how might that be different, and how might that be used for maybe just organizing at least. At the very least, I'd like to put up something that just kind of allows us to quantify interest at this stage.
Yeah. So I think next month during the quick pitch that I might actually get up and show it. So what I've been building is maybe not unlike name, but made for the sort of startup community. So it has stuff like a unified calendar for all these events. It's got stuff like actual angel list style profiles for local businesses, and it's all invite only, so it is private. And the idea is that it's like every sort of city has their own sort of instance of this. So we should take a look at it and see if it's something that you think would fit what you've got in mind. Right now, it's not. It was never designed to be like it was designed to be a free service, so I don't know how we can sort of graft on membership dues onto that.
Yeah, the membership piece of the social network is just kind of my kind of stopgap solution for trying to figure out how to fund it out of infancy, but not have to really come up with a whole accounting department for people to track it.
Right.
Now I figure if you can't access that template for DBA you want, you're probably making sure you're re-upped at least.
Right.
It's kind of weird.
So it's kind of the bootstrap what you were doing. You were thinking of membership fees. That was my next question is, when I think about an incubator, even for the idea that I'm working on, I always want to see that there is either access to capital, direct access to capital, or there's going to be access to people with capital. And so I think that capital piece is going to be huge. Obviously, one of the biggest challenges around Rochester is that venture capital piece. I mean, there's a big culture gap in the people with money in and around Rochester and what they're willing to invest in, and people in California with money and what they're willing to invest in, right? So I think, the role that you could play would be great if it was something with organizing people with capital around this community of people with ideas and that might be something where you're really onto something.
I get, to that point, what I'd like to see this incubator be is that kind of a conduit of sorts for money to the area, because, with our startup, we've kind of, I'm talking to local investors, and I've got friends that have been funded in the Valley and in New York City, and so, just kind of, from what I've seen in the last, 5 or 10 years, we could go out, we could raise $250,000 to $500,000 for new digs in Rochester, and give up more than half the company for that money. And that, it's payroll for a couple engineers for a few months, doesn't get you too far. Meanwhile, I can go to California tomorrow and raise 5 to 8 million and give up a minority of the company. And that actually gets me somewhere. So, what we're doing is, we kind of have, we're rockophiles, I guess. We love our Rochester. So we're trying our damnedest to kind of keep the startup in New York. And so for us, we've decided to kind of focus on product development and see if we can get to kind of a sustainable organic revenue point. And, basically our option is go to California if we want to go capital. So what I'm going to try to do with this incubator, I think we've got an option to do, is I want to kind of intelligently kind of staff the board with some folks that are downstate in New York City. And I think specifically in New York City, they've got like $4 billion a year in venture capital activity that goes through down there. And I think all of Western New York, from Syracuse west, maybe like 20 billion. Yeah. So, there's just a ton of money downstate and only an hour flight away. So I'd like to see us kind of create a little bit of a bridge between downstate capital and upstate deal flow.
That's
because if you're going to drop $5 million in a .com startup, in Soho, office space is $100 a square foot, engineers are $120 million a year. In Rochester, the office space is 1/8 to 1/10 the cost. Manpower is half or a third. So I'm kind of hoping that over time we can kind of build some models and the kind of pipeline some New York folks and capital.
Yeah, I think that would be a huge step for the incubator if you could establish those relationships with New York City VCs and potentially even Seattle and Boston. I'm sure that there are VCs and there are probably the upper echelons of VCs, and they're just doing fine down there, but there's probably that bottom rung who have a real problem competing for deal flow, and they're not prepared to do the whining and dining as, say Union Square Ventures, where an incubator like this in Rochester, where the standard cost of living is a lot lower, the engineering time is a lot cheaper, there's no shortage of ideas or resources here to work on things. That might make a lot of sense for everybody, right?
Just out of curiosity, how many of you know somebody like a Rochester startup company or entrepreneur who's moved to New York in the last 2 years? New York City. How about California?
Yeah.
Well, look at David Koretz. Even look at him. I mean, he did Blue Tie here,
Yeah.
and then Mykonos was a spinoff from Blue Tie. His tech people were working on ways to keep hackers and malicious attacks out of their hosted email service. And instead of keeping that here, he went to California because the access to capital wasn't here, the culture wasn't here. And so then we lost that proliferation of capital.
Yeah.
There's an $80 million exit that happens in California, and all his co-founders and his staff who had stock options, they're all going to start new companies, right? And so, if we can keep more of that here, I think that should be the ultimate goal. We're all sharing, right? So, but that capital piece is huge. Without the capital piece, we don't have anything.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, I think this thing's the earliest iteration, kind of being more organic growth minded. That stage one is just putting all of us in touch with some regularity and giving us that kind of common ground to show up at elbows. I show up my laptop to work, and I'll probably run into at least one or two of you guys working on something there. I can ask that question about payroll or whatever. There's a lot of expensive lessons you learn when you hire your first couple of people.
On that vein, one of the ideas that I've been bumping around is I kind of like the co-working model. It's really, it gives you that rubbing elbows with people, but it also has that free-form drop-in. You can be there for a day or a month or something. So in a space like this, you got plenty of extra space that could be made available for people like that could provide some of the day-to-day funding. I mean, if you got 20, 30 businesses that are showing up regularly, just paying, micro rent, that adds up in space that's otherwise useless.
Yeah.
It gives them an option. Plus, it's also, you get these independent freelancers they would then be maybe on site with something like that where they could help out the other businesses or they could get hired on. I mean, it's kind of like a little mini HR thing going on there too.
I want to talk to the co-working guys because that model, I mean, there's obvious parallels with the co-working model, and I'm not sure. I'm trying to find a way that this kind of works with it, and maybe they can piggyback on this.
Yeah, I don't want to like step on David's game over there. Yeah, I mean, he's doing good stuff.
Still working it out, but yeah, I think you're right. I mean, just there's basically going to be 3 tiers, of folks. There's going to be kind of at-large supporting community members that exist mostly in that virtual sense, show up at networking events, show up with some of the education pieces, maybe show up in that common area, coffee shop, beer area,
right.
where that first floor common flight space is. And then you've got your folks that are, maybe paying their $100 a month, $200 a month, probably have like a desk somewhere and a space. And then you probably have more anchor tenancy where, we're a small company with 12 people. Here's our door that locks. Our stuff behind it.
You could even get some of those anchor tenants to be some of the service providers. I mean, a lawyer needs an office someplace, and whether he or she has it in a place like this or some other spot, I mean, let them rent a space from you, and then they can provide their services there, get some clients, and when those people outgrow the incubator and go someplace else, maybe they'd stick with them.
Yeah.
Kind of like the General Assembly model, right? In New York.
Yeah.
And what do you see as next steps, and what can you do in this model too?
Well, right now we're kind of like in the middle of doing the paperwork and trying to acquire the 501c3 nonprofit status. Once you file your nonprofit DBA, you don't just get it. You're going to have to invest for a while, basically. So we're actually partnering with a guy who was one of the organizers for Pathways to Entrepreneurial Success, which was the event that MCC put on a couple months ago. But one of the organizers there is involved in a national center for, I want to say National Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation. They've kind of agreed to kind of lend their umbrella, basically. So we can get the 501c3 status. So we're kind of working on the back-end paperwork side of it because, ideally membership would be as close to 0 as possible, but, we'll see where it ends up. But if we get that 501c3 in place, we can actually create an endowment fund and, go out and actually see if we can get funded and maybe skip some of the more bootstrapping phase of this thing. But as far as what you guys will be going forward, I think at this phase, the incubator needs kind of a landing page at the very simplest that just is collecting interest just to get a pulse of how many folks, kind of want to be involved in any capacity, whether it's membership or organizing or whatever, just so we can kind of start creating a universe for the audience. The next step is probably putting together whatever that social network is, pay their own page at this stage, just to kind of allow folks to start posting their profiles and sharing what they're doing. And, it's kind of a hybrid of what you're doing and what Julian's got put up, but, just that kind of central, kind of a landing page, so to speak, for the startup activity you're in. And then obviously we point folks off to all the different scopes of the startups in the area. But trying to get that site together, finding people that are interested involved. I mean, this stage, it's still pretty early, so we're positioned, if you guys know, ideally investors who are more proactive and not just check cutters, but like starting businesses, investing in stuff. It's, at this point, kind of getting people together, circling wagons, basically, at this stage.
Check cutters aren't bad.
Yeah, they just check cutters. Actually, that's not too bad. So I'm sure I'll be interfacing at least with Tara and Julian about the site itself, specifically. But as we move forward here, I think in the next, I'd like to see a landing page up in 2 weeks. I should know about a 501c3 status by March. March, I should. That's at what pace it's going to get. I was having an ETA on the nonprofit status. And once we have nonprofit status, we can actually courting folks that might actually want to subsidize it.
And what is the county or the city there said about the site?
At this point, the site, they're interested in the guy that was showing me the property in that photo is one of the county real estate guys. They're like, sure, if you want it, give us a pitch, So they're trying to sell it, but they've been making for a decade and a half. This one, the Edwards building, the skinnier kind of web-faced one, was the one that still had the drop ceiling in it and looked pretty office-y. That one's apparently in pretty decent shape and doesn't have much asbestos in it. The other one, they actually abated all the asbestos already, getting ready for demo. So there's no ceiling tiles, there's no floor surfaces. that thing's like incredible. So, if you were to redevelop both buildings, all 440,000 square feet, we're probably looking at $20-30 million in all that space. In steps, you can start at Rockport, jump across the street, get the first 100,000 square feet, and get a couple million from the state or the problem foundation. Again, if we had, a social network put together and we had, let's say, 300 to 500 individuals that, it wasn't just like a petition, but they actually were paying a couple of bucks a month to be involved in this thing. It shows a proactive involvement. If we can go to the city or the county and say, hey, look, here's 300, 500 entrepreneurs that want to move downtown. Let's talk about that building. It's a lot better than just, the integrated people going, like, so we're thinking about doing an incubator. I think they get that like once a month. So they're down with it. They want to see things, with traction. I think before they get too serious about it.
Talk to the people at GRE.
Yeah, I've mentioned it to Mark Peterson, and kind of has that general high level like, God bless you, go get them kind of support, but
Get this once a month.
yeah, but it's again, that's why I think the next big milestone really is creating some kind of community that's measurable, quantifiable, and you can say, oh hey, look, now we've got this many people behind this. Can we take the next step and talk about where that's space? At this point, it's kind of like, they'll pat me on the head and say it's great. Go get them today. So.
You thought about mentors and advisors that you could line up and attract more attention?
Yeah, one of the nice things actually about doing this is I've been talking to Jim Sinal and Nasser Ali and all the other folks in the startup scene, and they've been really supportive about this because basically, I don't see this as competition to HTR or these other startup endeavors.
Right.
It's kind of like the whole bar model. If you're a bar all by yourself, that's okay, but there's 10 bars there running a lot more business, so it's the same kind of thing. So like Nasser's offered to kind of extend some of his advisors from the Start Fast program. So I mean, there is kind of a pool on deck that we can tap into once we've got some amount of meat on the bone, so to speak.
Yeah, and there's a lot of people too who hold Rochester near and dear to their hearts, even though they're gone.
Yeah.
Right, and if you could approach them with something that made a lot of sense and that could kind of rejuvenate some of the passion around Rochester for entrepreneurism, kind of like the Rochester Made they're doing, a lot of people might buy into that. Even like a Koretz might say, sure, I will sit on that board, I will mentor some people, and that could be really good.
And actually, speaking of the Rochester piece of this, with Tony Mancuso involved with his original incubator, still with his doors open in Batavia, one of the things I kind of like about this is, there's only certain types of businesses you can put in a Class A or B office, Center City, Rochester. You can't really put manufacturing or food processing or whatever. So, this incubator, I see it having kind of regional hubs. I mean, Tony's already kind of opened the door in Batavia, and he's got personally 500,000 million square feet of commercial industrial space that's kind of under his umbrella, kind of between basically here and Buffalo. And so there's spaces out there for those other types of businesses too. So, I'm talking to a tech audience here, so we're all thinking office space, but we would kind of go beyond that. If you wanted to have something on the east or west side, hopefully we have some kind of commercialism behind this, as opposed to just being city specific. But that also kind of opens it up a little bit more to some of the GREs and some of the other counties can kind of theoretically get behind this too. So it opens the scope a little bit.
So we keep talking about all this stuff down the road, which is great and everything, but what's it take to get into that Rockport building? I mean, for the 10,000 square
That's
feet.
probably going to take, I haven't done actual lease negotiations yet, so I don't know how willing they are to bend it all in the space. But I mean, theoretically, just to get our foot in the door with no one cutting us any slack, I'd probably say minimum $5,000 to $10,000 a month. Something like that. So I'm talking to some of the law firms I've been dealing with about sponsorship and what if we had this many members? What's the value? Kind of feeling folks out, trying to get a sense of how much we can get out of corporate sponsorships and stuff too. Because pretty quickly again, as soon as we had 100, 200 people on our list that were startups, I'm not going to see where they doesn't really start paying attention. But I would think the first 10,000 a month in sponsorship wouldn't be terrible. closer within reach. My own like internal milestone in my head is like I want to see this social network with a couple people on it, and I can go back out and go toe to toe with these guys and say, okay, now we're moving, show them something kind of tangible and some support behind it, and see if I can get them to flex the way. Minimally, it's probably 10 grand. And then, if we want services and all the other stuff, we got to have at least payroll for one person in there professionally. So, again, that's what wouldn't hurt to have membership just to make sure we can keep the lights on. But, if this thing gets to the point where it's a fully funded, pretty legitimate incubation facility going on downtown, there should be kind of a third phase of this thing. We keep talking about price to demand, price for space, but there should be some kind of full incubation model where you're actually getting free office space in theory. So eventually, kind of phase 3 of this thing, we get to the point where we've got a Rolodex of advisors and investors and that kind of in final organization. And then at that point, there'll be a nonprofit kind of endowment fund. So if someone wants to cut a check and just, out of the goodness of their heart, support the incubator as a fund over here. But if you actually want to invest in startups and it's a for-profit thing, there should be a venture fund, and that venture fund would probably be responsible for picking those, high probability for success kind of candidates and bringing them in, really fully incubating them in full space. And, that kind of more traditional, really hands-on incubation, that kind of stuff. Is significant.
And that might bring in some fresh blood too. That might bring in some fresh blood. Like if you look at the list to get into Y Combinator or one of the high-profile Silicon Valley incubators, combinators, whatever you want to call them, it's pretty long, and a lot of good businesses are getting turned down, right? So for a startup, coming to Rochester starts to look a lot better than being in California, just because there's no beta drain. There's not hundreds and thousands of people trying to do a startup all around you. There's a real potential to bring in some fresh blood if we have an incubator that's successful, it's community oriented, some co-working space. So, that could be a great milestone.
You got to figure, if you're coming from the West Coast and you just, assuming you weren't upside down in your house, sold it for anything close to near market value in California.
Exactly.
With a rounding error, you can buy yourself a house in Rochester. Move into an incubator where you're rubbing elbows with 70 other people that are trying to do something in the software or whatever space you're in. Pretty quickly find some guys that have pretty low burn rates that can put their heads down and have to work.
Yeah.
Me personally, my vision is I just want to see a building downtown where folks like ourselves are going to flock to, and there's a couple hundred people in the building doing the same general kind of self-starting thing that we're all trying to do. Just imagine, I'm just thinking about the amount of money we've, kind of lost in our first couple of, probably less than advisable legal transactions or HR transactions. I'm like, good God, if each one of us saved that, we could hire several people just so money we would saved in like this first couple of expensive lessons. So, that's kind of the idea basically, is just get ourselves, it's kind of like a hive, get a hive and start up minded folks together.
I think that's the important part. Is all these people are talking about how do you want to start a community. It's all about density, which is kind of what we're trying to do here. We meet once a month.
Exactly. And that's the thing. Everyone always meets once a month. There's a subgroup for everything, and they all meet once a month. But there's never that place where everyone just comes and shows up and just takes it that next step the next day. It's like you got to go meet that person for the monthly meeting for coffee formally next week over here. And, you just I don't know. If we all lived in a village within walking distance of each other, we'd be rich by now.
One where you can talk to media, whether it's DNC or RBJ.
Not yet, but we'll get pretty close. Yeah.
So buzz and interest.
Once we get the 501c3 kind of locked up, and I kind of want to make sure we have the ability to take money when we start generating that interest. So, but we're pretty close with that. And unlike New Digs, they'll actually talk about this startup. New Digs is competition for our apartment section. So the DNC will not have any reports on New Digs. You can read about us in the RBJ.
One point that Sierra made last time when we talked to him last week is even in New York City, your startup hub isn't New York City. It's like the 2 blocks around Union Square.
Yeah.
If you're in Brooklyn, you may as well be out in like upstate or something. It's just the so even if like one building and not the half start, as everybody's there bumping into.
Yeah, that's the amazing thing. The threshold, the bar separator. I mean, the whole Denver startup scene, the tech stars and all that kind of stuff. I mean, it's like 2 or 3 blocks downtown. The startups, it's like this hot thing that we're all aspiring to be. It's like it's not really hard. If we just all showed up in the same building, maybe we have that. So
The flip side is that we're fairly dispersed geographically in this area. There's not everyone downtown. We got to make sure that it's something that's appealing to people out in the suburbs and stuff like that.
Right,
It's
and
got
that's
to,
the kind of regional thing.
yeah.
And you just always say, well, what about Greece? I want to Greece. So,
Yeah.
I mean, my kind of personal tint on this is like, oh, that's, for the first one, it's central. And me personally, I like the notion of putting a lot of people center city in the long run. Got my own hookups on that, but, I definitely want to see some regional stuff.
And to kind of play devil's advocate and just in some ways may not be popular. Like personally, I mean, this is a huge idea. It's something that I love. Have you thought about going outside of the inner loop? Do you think that, because my personal opinion is like, I know we talk about the startup and things like that, but I think the people who are going to pay the bills are like, the loan insurance agent, folks like that aren't necessarily tech minded. So there's so many businesses out there that could, that just like you had mentioned, learning, how to do a blog on WordPress, learning how to use Dropbox. They could be so much more productive, just by learning those things. But people that have, less than businesses that are less than technically oriented, because I think, that population is so much more large. Getting around to the point is that do you have a feeling of how people feel about going inside the city? I mean, if this may not be popular, but I don't like going inside the inner loop. There's not much there for me. It's not attractive. It's not pleasing to the eye. It's a pain to park. There's nothing interesting there yet. But if the incubator would be there's almost nothing interesting there. There's a couple things, if that was there, I mean, that would make me think. But the first thing that I would think is I don't want to go down there.
Yeah,
People that live in the city, how about civil educators? And I know you were talking to them about getting out this space.
Yeah.
I think it was even dependent on the law, it was something like that.
Yeah, they're expensive. They didn't seem incredibly friendly to startup.
Well, I'm sorry.
They didn't seem incredibly friendly to. They wanted a long trail of how long have you been in business? Are you super sure you're going to pay my rent every month for the time? Can you have 3 resources vouch for that?
But there may be other smaller facilities around. I've worked for various companies that have been in little, buildings that used to be factories and now they're empty, and they get cheap office space there just because the owner's desperate to have anyone there, and they haven't been within the inner loop. So I think
there's a lot of
I mean,
those around.
that's what I'm thinking. There's a lot of empty real estate
There's
out
a ton
there.
of options. I mean, I'm not married to this space. The reason I kind of use this as the, kind of kickoff is just, we've got kind of a relationship with someone who's willing to lend us a lot of the overhead space. So
Yeah.
if we wanted to have a space where you could teach your customers how to use your site, how much money would we have to come up with to provide a computer lab with 30 computers,
Right.
and then provide the 300 square feet for that overhead.
Yeah, and
So I mean, it's just that's why that space. But I think you're definitely right.
And,
That's
well,
the nature of that.
yeah, in asking that question, I do think, my opinion is that having it not in having it someplace where more people are already after 6 o'clock. My opinion would be a little bit more marketable. That would be a benefit. What you mentioned about having the space and whether there's space available and people wanting to fill that space, obviously that's a benefit as well, and could be a much bigger benefit. But yeah, I was just wondering if it was thought about possibly going.
Yeah, my original business plan, I think, had 5 different locations. I just kind of figured I'd run with this one most to paint a picture. Yeah.
I'm just curious. I mean, I'm very interested in this. I just wonder how many other people here would participate. I would totally participate. The right price and right location. And I'm wondering what minimum number. I mean, I want to just start fast. I'm wondering what the minimum number of people we could do to find some even temporary space that are going to start it. I don't know.
I'll start asking one of the folks that we're talking about location. So start finding out professionals. I mean, basically, we've been feeling like we've been getting close to a tipping point with this for a while, and so when Taryn asked me to kind of talk today, I was like, well, I'll hit work isn't totally filed yet, but I guess I might as well mention it. Good folks. But yeah, I'll ask. I would like to see doors open somewhere in the summer. Definitely.
And can we, at the end, have those who are interested come to me and I'd like to get your names and so that we have an idea.
Or you can pass it.
Yeah, I'll just pass this to you.
I just, I wanted to say, how many folks here actually live in the city? I mean, I don't mean to, the opposite devil's advocate, I don't know what that is. I would not participate in any incubator that's not in the city of Rochester.
Oh, I'm not saying the city, I'm saying the interview.
Inside the interlude, yeah. No, to me, it's one of these things where, there's a lot outside of the center city, and I'm very peripherally involved in this. Very peripheral. My goal would be to drive stuff towards the center city, where there is lots of empty space. There is actually, can't see it on this, but there's a parking garage right in the kind of the middle of all of that stuff. There is plenty of parking. There's major streets, and there's 2 incubators, 2 business incubators within a stone's throw of here. Yes, in Henrietta, that are really not applicable for any of us. And so,
I don't want this to turn into an office.
I'm sorry?
I don't think you want this to turn into an office.
Right.
I mean, to me,
These have to be a little funky.
Right, and like having a bunch of insurance companies who are trying to learn technology is great, but we're not going to be a great city because we have a bunch of insurance agents. We're going to be a great city because we have people creating the next great place.
Yeah.
You have to do that in some kind of cool way.
Yeah. Something I think is kind of interesting about it.
Too, if you're going to be in the city, whether it be the state, county, or in the city itself. It's like you're more likely to get funding, short-term and long-term, or discounts on space.
Yeah. We can get 100,000 square feet for free. Right. So,
Yeah.
I have a quick question. How is the county, like the county's basically not, are they going to cut you any kind of break with this space?
Possible. I mean, to go. I mean,
it's the kind of deal where you just need to spend $20 million every year.
yeah. Or get some back behind it, and they'll want to kind of show. I mean, so basically, it's kind of interesting because right here is the Broadport building, and then right here is that Edwards building, that white face building, and this is Mortimer Street that runs along here next to all these surface parking lots. So that whole big central bus terminal thing they want to build going forward, the big glass bus thing, is actually going to take up all of Mortimer Street. This whole right of way here is going to be like the new central bus terminal. So one of the nice things about having the community incubator adjacent to the center of our transportation hub is that it's one bus ride for everyone, transfers and stuff. And so just in terms of accessibility of the facility and stuff like that, I dug that myself because again, this is probably 3 years before theoretically we'd be in the Edwards building and then have the new transit hub here, and then I think it's just another couple of blocks north near the train station, so folks coming from out of town could walk 5 blocks south, be at the incubator, and then get back on the train and be back in Buffalo for 20 bucks. But yeah, I mean, the parking thing is a big issue. This actually is this parking lot that's in the image here, our parking garage. This half of it is still standing, and the city owns it. This part here, they actually condemned and leveled, and it's just this huge surface lot the city owns, and they're just throwing park benches in it right now.
So the convention center's there, and I think there's another parking garage.
The convention center's here, the South Ave garage is right here. Minus the loop.
Cascade's not talking there.
Emails, telephone numbers.
Yes.
What's in the area for services, restaurants, that sort of thing?
And it's not right here. There.